I would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker, licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. Welcome to it, folks. Today is Tuesday, July 12th, 2016. I hope the week is working out well for you. Got a couple of interesting stories here, I think that kind of fit in with our overall vibe of keeping track of some of the important things that are influencing real estate. One relates to interest rates, and despite their low interest rates, the low availability of mortgages, which I'm not seeing that as the truth on the ground in my business. We'll take a look at what they say. I don't know if this is a phenomenon elsewhere, but we'll try to dovetail that in with what we've already talked about so far this week and in past weeks. And then we'll also talk about a principal reduction that's going to be happening for some borrowers, interestingly enough. So we'll get to that as well. And we may have time for a final little something that I wanted to throw in there because I thought it was interesting and some of the takeaways were good. So we'll see where that lands us. Let's go ahead and start with, first, is there any house cleaning stuff? Of course, as always, the best place to get in contact with me is the website at www.therebelbroker.com. Right now, the push is on for folks to take a couple of minutes out of their day to participate in a survey for the show that just kind of helps identify the demographics of the audience. It would be a big help to me. If you get a chance, head on over to www.therebelbroker.com. There's a big red button at the very tippy top of the website that says take a survey to help the show. And if you could take a minute out and do that for me, I would deeply appreciate it. Now let's go ahead and jump in here and talk about the first story for today, which is I'm going to go with principal reduction for the first story because it's an interesting one. It's touted as this groundbreaking program, and it comes to us from the Federal Housing Finance Agency. So you have to remember that this applies to the government-sponsored agencies Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And they're going to offer principal reduction to a select number of borrowers. And it's really up to you to decide. It's going to be a super small number of folks, but it's up to you to decide whether or not you think does this have an element of fairness to it? Is this the right way to go? I'm a little bit torn on it, frankly. I'm a little bit hesitant to see this kind of thing happening with tax dollars, because remember, these are things that are going to directly affect the payback of what was originally spent in the form of tax dollars for a lot of these bailouts. It goes back to alleviating a lot of that through these government-sponsored entities. So it's a concern. They're only being made available to owner-occupied properties that are 90 days or more delinquent as of March 1st, 2016. So in other words, you haven't paid your mortgage for at least 90 days as of March 1st of this year. And it's only going to apply to borrowers whose mortgages have an outstanding unpaid principal balance of $250,000 or less, and whose market-to-market loan-to-value ratios are more than 115%. So, very upside down, folks, and clearly homes at the extreme low end. So immediately you start to see an awful lot of segments of the country being excluded. So it seems to be focused very much on the least expensive properties, and because in order to be that much upside down in terms of the value of the home versus what you owe, and at that price point, I mean, we've talked about price points here. We've looked at average prices in a lot of different communities. So there's really a fairly select area where these numbers would be a reality for a lot of folks. And when they first ran these numbers, the FHFA, the Federal Housing Finance Agency, was estimating 33,000 borrowers were going to qualify and be eligible for what they were calling their, quote, final crisis era modification program. Interestingly enough, that number of borrowers is actually lower. The new report that was published last Monday states that the Federal Housing Finance Authority now estimates that more than 30,000 borrowers will be eligible, or exactly 30,761. And here's the part that I don't get. I mean, we're clearly moving in a direction where fewer and fewer people need this relief. And the FHFA indicated that the reduction was attributable to, quote, the fact that the housing market is continuously evolving and may have improved in some areas. So clearly the number of homes that qualify is decreasing all the time because the market's improving. So it makes me wonder, why do this now? If what we're seeing is a shrinking number of homes that fit this criteria, why push through? Why not let the market catch up and deal with these if we're considering this as a robust market that's moving forward? Because remember, an awful lot of these folks that are making these statements are talking about how robust the real estate market is, and this just seems like something that's being done that kind of puts that on its head, right? It puts the assumption on actually these things still need to be dealt with, and maybe that's true. So what's the breakdown on this? Are you someone who might potentially be helped by this? According to the FHFA, eligible borrowers, quote, tend to be concentrated in communities across the country that have not yet fully recovered from the foreclosure crisis, especially in states with long foreclosure timelines. And usually when they're referring to long foreclosure timelines, they're talking about the difference between judicial and non-judicial states, and we've talked about that here. And again, what's interesting is we're now just seeing a lot of these states catching up. So I'm not real sure why you would push this now as opposed to waiting for the process to be done in these states and let the market do what these folks claim the market's doing. So, but according to the FHFA, the top 10 states with the most potentially eligible borrowers are number one in Florida with approximately 6,200 eligible borrowers, New Jersey with another 6,200 potential borrowers, New York with 2,800, Illinois with 2,400, Ohio with 1,200, Pennsylvania with 1,100, Nevada with 1,000, Maryland with 726, Connecticut with 703, and Massachusetts with 682. And you can see that this is very much directed at that lowest end. But I'd love to hear back from you on whether you think this is something that needs to happen. I'm not sure when this was initially conceived. Maybe it just took an awful long time for it to finally come to a point where they were thinking about doing it, and maybe it made more sense when it was first being considered. It just seems to me that if we have any faith in this market, a lot of these folks seem to think that there should be a lot of faith. I know we've had discussions that make us wonder if we should have faith, but this almost seems like a move that would be made by folks who tend to subscribe more to what we think is going to happen with the marketplace, where we assume that there's going to be more challenges, and it's almost as if they want to deal with some of these before things potentially get bad again. To use as an example, we're not going to go through everything on this list, but as an example of the 6,200 potentially eligible borrowers in Florida, loan balances of $156,719 are the average, an average loan to value of 158%, and are an average of 1,590 days delinquent, which is 4.5 years. So that's already circumstances that are nuts in terms of what's going on with these properties. It's such a small number of properties that it kind of makes you think, well, maybe these are just the worst situations of the worst. But then I think of all the people who are sort of in that ballpark, maybe not quite meeting these criteria, who who have done things right? What about the folks who did things right and stayed current with their mortgages? I guess my core problem with this, and the reason why I bring this up, is it's more of the situation where you, I don't know, through inaction with other borrowers, kind of punish them, right? For the folks who did it right, who may have bought the same price point, people who might be neighbors to these folks. They made ends meet. They lived up to their obligations. They did what needed to be done to stay current, but they're not going to get any of this relief. But the folks who didn't, who instead just stopped paying their mortgage and continued to live in their home, instead of moving on to something else and becoming a renter somewhere else for less cost or whatever the circumstances might be, they want to forgive those amounts. So I guess I don't want to phrase it as rewarding bad behavior, but it's absolutely rewarding folks for not doing what more responsible folks did, I guess. And remember, this is being done on your behalf. This isn't a private institution. This is a public. These are government-sponsored entities. These are Fannie and Freddie. So even folks who are in identical situations with other organizations that bought their mortgages in the secondary market, they're probably long been dealt with. But again, the judicial system for foreclosures in some of these states would have made that impossible. But it's only if you're owned by Fannie and Freddie. If you're owned by somebody else, by the original lender or the original bank or any of these others, you don't fall under the category of being available to you as an option. So I don't know. I guess it just rubs me the wrong way a little bit. I wouldn't mind hearing what you folks think about it. But if I'm not mistaken, this is one of those things where you may actually need to go and petition to see if you're eligible for this. And so I'd suggest that if you meet this criteria, you need to reach out. And if your loan is held by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, and you would know that by the check you're writing or the check you used to write, like 90 days earlier than March 1st, whoever your current holder of your loan is, if it's Fannie or Freddie, you'll want to check and see if you qualify for this. Yeah, so I don't know. It's up to you to decide what you think about that. It's a relatively small percentage of what's going on out there, but what sort of standard does it set? Is it something that you're okay with? All right, we're going to take a quick break here, and then when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about interest rates and the difficulty for some folks, apparently, in finding a mortgage. So stay right there. Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right, aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner-broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909. Welcome back. Next on the hit parade for today, folks. We've got record interest rates in terms of how low they are. In fact, let me give you a quick rundown on what those are. Now, all the numbers that we track are continuing to remain hovering right around their 52-week low. As of right now, today, and as I record this show actually on July 11th, interest rates are up 0.01 pretty much across the board, with the FHA 30-year fixed having stayed the same at 3.25. But the 30-year fixed rate mortgage is currently at 3.38. The 15-year fixed rate mortgage is at 2.72. The jumbo 30-year fixed is at 3.49. The 5/1 adjustable rate mortgage is at 2.85. So all still ridiculously low. The biggest jump we've seen, though, is in refinance. That's where we seem to be getting the bulk of folks taking advantage of these numbers. And I know that's something it's on my list of things to do, to go out and check and see if changing any of my loans is going to make any sense. So, and it's something you should absolutely have on your list. Get in contact with someone. You can do it with Quicken Loans or whoever you like in the business to get this stuff done. But I'd go out and check and see what a difference it might make for you on your monthly cash flow to take advantage of these reduced rates. Now, what's kind of interesting about this is the Mortgage Credit Availability Index, according to the Mortgage Bankers Association, fell by 1.3% in June. Now, what this does is it analyzes data from Ellie Mays, that's another one of the sort of government-sponsored entities, Allreg's Market Clarity Business Information Tool, to evaluate these numbers to determine the availability of mortgages. Now, before I get too much into this, I want to point out that for me on the ground and for folks I'm talking to, the very first thing I have them do, as soon as someone contacts me and says, I'd like to find a house, I ask them what they've been pre-approved for. If they haven't already been pre-approved, I get them pre-approved. I put them in, if they aren't already dealing with a lender, I give them some references, have them talk to someone and get pre-approved. I have yet to have someone come back without getting pre-approved for some amount of money by some lender. I'm not real sure what the dynamic is. I'd love to hear from a lender what this number really reflects, because I just get this feeling that it's disconnected from the reality that the rest of us know about. I'm not sure if it's focused on some certain types of lending that tend to make it get weighted in one direction or another. Let's see. According to the MBA's report, of the 4 component indices, the conventional MCAI saw the greatest tightening, down 2.4 over the month. The conforming MCAI was down, so I'm sure they're referring to loans here, so conforming loans versus conventional, et cetera, was down 1.8, while the jumbo MCAI fell 0.9, and the government MCAI decreased 0.3%. And the primary differences between the total MCAI and the component indices are the population of loan programs that they examine. The government MCAI examines FHA, VA, USDA loan programs, while the conventional MCAI examines non-government loan programs. The jumbo MCA looks at everything flagged as jumbo, while the conforming MCI examines loan programs that fall under the conforming loan limits. So that all sort of makes sense. And what they're talking about here in terms of availability is that there's the difference between the folks who apply for a loan and the folks who actually get it. It seems to be what they're saying is the difference here. Quote, credit availability decreased over the month, driven primarily by a decrease in availability of conventional conforming loan offerings. Well, that doesn't sound like folks aren't getting loans. That sounds like different lending products decreased. They go on to say, in particular, a number of investors discontinued their conventional high-balance 7-year adjustable rate loan programs while leaving their 5-year and 10-year ARM programs unchanged. So it sounds more like a reduction in or a shift in what products are available through lending versus any real drop in folks actually getting approved. And they go on to say here, now this is according to both MBA and Zillow, they reported sharp increases in mortgage applications, particularly refinance applications. But the point they're trying to make is that many of these aren't ending up in actual mortgages. Here would be my question, because this, as I said, this just doesn't. This should not put any brakes on you going out and finding out if you can get pre-approved for a mortgage or to see if you can get refinanced. My question would be, someone goes out and gets pre-approved, just like I stepped out and mentioned a minute ago. The first thing you do is get pre-approved for a loan. So you start your mortgage application. Well, we're already in an environment where we know that there's 4 or 5 folks making an offer for every property that comes up in my marketplace. If a certain number of those folks give up or get turned down over and over again, it seems to me that the numbers would reflect an increase in the number of applicants, but a reduction in the number of mortgages that are actually created, simply because the folks who are applying aren't finding properties they can get, right? They're making offers that don't get accepted. So is this a number that simply tells us that these folks are delayed, or is it really telling us these folks aren't getting the loan? They've worded it in a way that doesn't say to me these applications get denied. It says these applications, and they don't use the word denied anywhere in any of this. They simply use the word, it doesn't result in an increase in mortgages. So I sense kind of a disconnect and a play on words here. And I think it dovetails in with what we've already discussed. There's this weird push to redefine, because we've already talked about the change in how to define your credit history, right? They're changing and going to unconventional methods. We've already talked about the broadening of all kinds of crazy low-end lending instruments, the 3% loan, the 1% loan, the 0% loan. And those are all government-backed. There's this push for these not only more aggressive lending to folks who have riskier credit histories, but then there's also this push to reduce the difficulty, to lower the bar, so to speak, in what it takes to get a higher credit rating as an individual. So I'm not real sure why this is on. It's like they're trying to say people are trying to get a loan and can't get it, where I think the reality is not that. I think the reality is people are applying for a loan, and a loan never ends up being created because they just don't find a house, or they make offers and don't get accepted. So there's this much longer delta, this much longer delay that's occurring between the time I apply for a loan and the time I guess you could say consummate that loan through purchasing a property, simply because of the way the market is. Because this statement on what's going on with mortgages does not jive with everything else, all the other stuff we've talked about. We talked about numbers just the other day with metro areas where days on market is crazy low, and all these prices are going up, and all these other types of things that all indicate a marketplace of multiple offers. Homes selling for above asking price. All of these things are going on, and you would not see this happening in a marketplace like that, right? Does that make sense? But in none of these articles, and I've read several articles on this particular subject, none of them say that these mortgages were denied. They simply say that while we've seen an uptick in the number of applications, we have not seen an uptick in the number of funded mortgages or in the number of closed mortgages. And their immediate conclusion is lending is hard to find. Lending is hard for borrowers to get. And I frankly don't buy it. I think that's bull. I don't think that's the most likely explanation for this, particularly given all of the extremely low-end products that are currently being offered, whether we're talking about the 3% or 1% or no percent down loans. I'm just not seeing, to say that folks don't have an option at a low end like that, or at these really crazy subprime level. I mean, that's what we have to call it, right? We're back to subprime lending. To imply that we don't have representation there, that we don't have options for folks at that price point is ridiculous. And here in my local marketplace, again, I'm just not seeing that as a problem. I'm seeing plenty of folks getting pre-approved for all kinds of different price points. And it has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not they're able to get the loan. It has more to do with whether or not they're able to find the property to exercise that loan. So kind of keep this in the back of your head, because I think you're going to see more and more of this kind of headline, this kind of interpretation of what's going on with mortgages. It's interesting that they're trying to push this idea that it's so difficult to borrow money. And it makes you wonder if somebody somewhere is not pushing out a press kit to push this idea to validate these really crazy lending programs that are going on. And remember, these are all government-backed, so these are all ones where you're on the hook for them. And it's like they're trying to create a buzz indicating that, wow, we really need to create these products for folks to borrow because folks are in a tough spot in terms of being able to get loans. And while I can't speak for the rest of the country, I'd love to hear from folks in the business across the country on this topic. I'm just not seeing that here. Maybe Silicon Valley is a bizarre place where for some reason the money flows freely, or there's not an issue. But I'm just not seeing the dynamic, or I'm not seeing the market forces that these folks seem to imply are at play. What I see is a marketplace where it's just extremely difficult to finally get into escrow on a property, which would explain the disconnect between folks who start the process, which happens before you buy, and the conclusion of the process, which would be a closed escrow. It's just, it all makes complete sense when you realize how we see prices going up, but we see the number of actually closing deals reducing without a corresponding reduction in the number of buyers in the marketplace, right? It seems like a simple conclusion. It makes me think I must be missing something. There have got to be guys who spend their lives analyzing these numbers who can see this, but they don't seem to be saying it. And I'm out here kind of alone, implying this or saying this outright, and I just I'm perfectly fine with embracing the theory that I've got it wrong, that I'm not looking at the numbers right, or that there's something else going on, or that I'm in a very outlying, bizarre marketplace. But that's just not what I'm seeing. The other thing I wanted to hit today, because I thought it was interesting, I talk to folks occasionally who are very hesitant to jump into real estate. And it's a fear factor. And I get that. There are comfort levels that people have with things. And one thing that really got, and I get it, this is Robert wandering into the tall weeds. My son, God bless him, my son passed his driver's test today, which was a huge deal here at the house because this was not his first attempt to pass his driver's test. But I was sitting in the car with him, getting him ready before the nice lady comes out to make him drive. I guess there's some states where you don't drive on the real streets. You just drive around cones in a parking lot. Here in California, you get behind the wheel and you drive the streets for real with an evaluator, and they dock you points for things you don't do right. My boy is one of the best drivers I've ever seen, better driver than me. But when he gets to the point where he, well, I guess to use a great colloquialism that would fit this particular example, when the rubber meets the road for him and it's really time to perform and do it, he freaks out. His anxiety levels jump through the roof. And what's funny is I often see that same reaction when I have a first-time investor who is just about to sign that offer on his first property, or a buyer who has gotten through the entire stressful process of going through escrow and is now at the title company about to sign all the documents. And it's that fear factor that just grabs you. It doesn't have to have anything to do with rational thought. It is just this, in the core of your being, concern for what you're going to do. Connor got 100%, by the way, after his multiple attempts at getting this done. Came through. We had a great time. And his reward was to track down Pokemon using Pokemon Go downtown. So it's one of the few things that makes my kid get outside, so I'm down with that. Anyway, so I realized that while I've kind of used an odd, probably something my son will be mad for me mentioning on the show as an example of stressful things and linking that with real estate, I think it's one of the real things that holds people back. But what I think is that it also holds people back even earlier than in the process. It's one thing to jump in and say, I've analyzed the numbers, I've done the math, I feel like I know this marketplace, let's go ahead and buy this investment property. But what really hurts for you is when that concern, that anxiety comes into play before you ever even go out and look at a property. You don't even want to jump in. You're deathly afraid you might find something that actually fits your criteria and will do what you want it to do for you, because then you'd have to do something about it, right? Now, I wanted to bring this up because for whatever reason, I was reminded of a story I once heard that Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? Everyone knows him as a movie star, big money box office guy, and so governor of the state of California. But what a lot of people don't realize, and I understand this to be the case, I Googled it and I'll include the article here. He actually made way more money in real estate than he ever made in the movies, and he made it a lot of it apparently before he ever even got into the movies. And I get that it's tough to relate to a guy like Arnold Schwarzenegger because he's got that whole I'm a big muscle dude thing happening. But he's a pretty savvy investor guy, and he has multiple rental properties, both residential and commercial. He's owned a construction company. He's at a mail order business, a restaurant chain. And I didn't realize this till I read this article, but he owned a commercial jumbo jets, which get leased. And his estimated net worth is over $450 million. And it laid out sort of, in his book, I guess, he sort of laid out what are his primary things? What if he had to come up with a list of, say, 8 things that are important? What do you do to achieve that success? And I thought I'd run down the list real quick. We've spent some time at the beginning of this year, right around New Year's, pushing for setting goals. I like to try to remind folks on at least a weekly basis. Keep in touch with your goals. Don't just write them and then leave them. Keep them going. Use the tools I've suggested to help you track them, whatever those goals are, whether they're real estate related or not. But don't be afraid of your own goals. You absolutely can achieve them. And if you think about where Arnold Schwarzenegger came, where he simply arrived in this country with a gym bag and a really bad accent, and before he was making any money doing TV, doing movies or anything else, he was building his worth through real estate. And number one for him was to have a clear vision and goal setting. And I honestly think we covered this pretty well. If you want to go back to the beginning of the year, right around the end of 2015, if you go to the very end of December, very beginning of January, we talked about setting goals, creating goals, prioritizing goals, what your very first steps need to be to achieve your goals. We talked about all that. I'd love for y'all to go back and revisit that. Next on his list is become an expert salesperson. And a lot of people shy away from that term. I'm not a huge fan of the term salesperson because I think for a lot of folks it implies deceit. You don't need to embrace deceit to be a good salesperson. You simply need to be able to identify what are the things that make this thing attractive, right? So if you are in the real estate business or you're someone who wants to invest in real estate, it's absolutely an exercise in honesty where you can evaluate what's attractive. If you're someone who wants to flip properties, it's your ability to identify what do people want, what do people need, what are they pursuing, what are the things that they want in there as part of their purchase of a piece of real estate, and then you have to bring that knowledge out and provide it, right? Whether you're providing a home for them to invest in after you've remodeled it, or whether you're providing a home for them to rent. Being aware of those things makes you a good salesperson. Recognizing what people demand makes you a good salesperson. And I'm going to make the argument that the truly awesome salespeople are the non-liars, are the ones who don't use deceit, the ones who have been able to identify the benefits that things bring and then share those with people, right? I'd almost prefer there was another word for it because every time I hear salesperson, I would never want to put that on my resume, but I consider myself good at the things that people consider to be good salesperson traits in terms of being able to identify what makes it something super attractive. Anyway, number 3, psychology is critical to success. A quote from his early days of bodybuilding, Schwarzenegger understood the mind-body connection and how psychology plays a big role achieving your goals and with investing. I honestly, I agree with this stuff. I'm not someone who tends to be a Tony Robbins, playing Eye of the Tiger in the background as you box through the streets to get yourself motivated. But for some folks that works. Find what works for you. And I think just saying psychology is a way of being more broad in that interpretation and saying you don't necessarily have to go for the cheesy standard example of what gets people motivated, but understand what makes you want to get up and do it. And implement that and make it part of your routine. Number 4, quote, to be successful, you must be brutal with yourself and focus on the flaws. I think you got to do this to the point where it doesn't paralyze you. If you focus on your flaws too much and don't come up with a solution plan for your flaws, you're going to consider those to be the things that will prevent you from doing what you're trying to do. If you decide that your flaw is you don't know the market well enough to make an educated decision, well, the solution is for you to educate yourself, not to just constantly beat yourself up for it. It's not just about focusing on the flaw, it's focusing on the solution for your flaws. But be brutal with yourself. I mean, your own worst critic should be yourself, but it shouldn't simply end there. It needs to begin and end with the solutions to the flaws that you find in yourself. Number 5, research before investing. If there was a motto to this show, this would probably it. Do your research before you invest. One of the things I want to provide to you in this show is things you can use as data points and say, you know what? Here's something the Rebel Broker shared with me that might just apply to my situation. And that gives you that thing to sort of hook on to for you to move forward and find out what the statistical realities are for you in your specific marketplace where you're trying to achieve your goals. Number 6, this is a huge one. I've experienced this in my personal life. I have heard other people say things to clients I've been working with. Don't listen to the naysayers. There will always be someone who tells you what you're about to try to do is a bad thing, that your odds of failure are too high. You don't want to do that. Do not listen to those people. Would there be an exception to that? I suppose if these are people who have absolutely already succeeded in exactly what you're trying to do, you could look at them as being honest, but you'd want to ask them for feedback on, well, okay, then you've done this. Tell me how you did it in a way that represents less of a risk based on what you're telling me. If they can't explain that to you, then these are folks who want theirs but want to close the door behind you. These are the folks who would listen to what you say, tell you haven't got a hope of doing it, and then go out and do it themselves. Don't listen to the people who tell you can't achieve it. There are, for every one person who's going to be supportive, there's going to be 10 people who are willing to tell you you've got no chance. So don't listen to those folks. Number 7, and of course this would probably be Schwarzenegger's motto: reps, reps, reps. The quote here is, to become an expert in any areas, it's just a matter of rinse and repeat. Arnold applied this philosophy obviously to bodybuilding, but also to acting in business. Just do it over and over and over again. Another thing that we've encouraged here, take what you've learned on this show, for instance, in terms of how to analyze a property, and do it 100 times before you actually make that first offer. Get to the point where you're so comfortable with the process of doing it that it's almost second nature and you don't even need to really think about it. You're using numbers that you've now internalized because you've learned your market so well. Next, number 8, and the final item on his list, it's not how much you make, it's how much you keep. That is an awesome one. And it's another philosophy of this show in terms of, we talked about how much it is to get involved in certain markets, and the bottom line is you don't need to pursue these crazy high-end markets in order to keep more. You can keep more by offering great service and quality properties in these other marketplaces where your return rate's going to be better, which will outstrip areas that are crazy like San Francisco or San Jose, where the barrier to entry is so high it's crazy. So I wanted to mention those. I wanted to bring those up just because I think it's good to remind yourself of this stuff. And if you've got someone, and I know you do, because I've had them in my life, folks I've tried to sort of mentor and coach. I know I mentioned late last year someone I was trying to coach, and they gave in to a naysayer in their family, and just bought into this whole long line. And I'll tell you what, it's sad. It's disappointing to see it happen, because I'll tell you what I may have had some minor suggestions in terms of the direction that this person was trying to go with a goal of theirs. They absolutely could have made this work. This idea of theirs failed because they decided it was going to fail, not because the world made it fail. And I don't want that to happen to you. I honestly think that for those of you who can go out there, just build your experience, get yourself going, get yourself moving, not necessarily taking action yet. I'm perfectly fine with you going out there and just going through the motions to get comfortable with it. But don't let yourself be stopped by the naysayers. It's ridiculous to me how much time and effort some folks will spend convincing you to give up on something you're shooting for, out of some misguided belief that they think they're doing you a favor. They're not. And as well-intentioned as they may be, you simply have to nod and smile to those folks and plug away. And this is not the kindest way to put it, but see what they've done, see what they've achieved. If these are folks who are telling you to quit, who are absolutely not in the place that you want to be, these are not people whose lives you want to emulate, why would you care what they say about what should happen with your life in the first place? So just kind of keep that in mind. I think it's the number one thing stopping good things from happening in people's lives, is when they listen to folks who are telling them that they simply can't achieve their goals. All right. So I hope that's been helpful. It's interesting to get a little bit of an insight into someone who has made a dramatic success of a lot of elements of their life. If he had never been in movies, Arnold Schwarzenegger was probably worth nearly what he's worth today, simply because he went with real estate, which was a great way for him to earn his wealth and earn a little financial freedom from that. And of course, on this show, I'm hoping to provide you with the kind of information that will let you do the exact same thing. All right, so if you could take a minute out of your day, head on over to www.therebelbroker.com, click on the participate in the survey to help the show button, which is the nice big red button at the tippy top of the webpage. I would be forever in your debt. As always, thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you all next time.